Hello everyone, this is Tactical Lich here, and today we have a battle replay sent in by Strat Games between the Empire and the Dwarfs. Now Empire usually against the Dwarfs is in a rather disadvantaged situation, with the heavy infantry of the Dwarfs and the range firepower countering the rather flimsy leadership of the Empire troops. But here, Strat Games going for a full horde mode with a full 20 stack of state troops, with a front line composed of flagellants and swordsmen to bolster the numbers. At the back, a lot of armor piercing in the form of halberdiers and the great swords. He's attempting to overpower the heavily armored dwarven front line with pure numbers and threaten their backline missile pressure. And for the leadership, we have a single Bright Wizard with a single Fireball spell, going full economy in the Lord choices here, especially with the Huntsman General with nothing, just himself all naked and the firepower he brings in his quiver. As for the Dwarf player, Yumi here, we have a full front line of miners with blasting charges ready to blast up those manlings, or otherwise known to the Dwarfs as the Cunning Umgi. And in the front, we have some Dwarf warriors to delay the advance of the state troops. At the back, a bunch of artillery protected by Dwarf warriors, including 2 flame cannons and 2 Dwarf cannons. Also, with the leftover funds, there is a single unit of Quarrelers in the middle to put out a little bit more missile pressure. In the skies, the Dwarfs brought their top-of-the-line aircrafts, including 1 gyro bomber and some brimstone gun gyrocopters. As for the Dwarven leadership, we have Ungrim Iron Fist, and that's basically it for the army builds on both sides. And now let us see this Umgi horde unleashed upon the Dwarven frontline. As you can see here, this ocean of manling basically went for a full width approach, going as wide as possible with minimal depth, with only 2 lines of infantry. And in the skies, the brimstone gun gyrocopters are already taking some damage from the anti-large firepower of the Huntsman General. As for the front line there's already some flagellants being gunned down by a bunch of cannons. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of good targets for the cannons to shoot at because there's no cavalry, no large targets, only a bunch of cheap chaff infantry. Flagellants, they're taking some noticeable damage from the cannons, but this is definitely not a efficient use of these anti-large firepower. At the back, the great swords are now being shot by the grand cannons, as the flame cannons are now blasting away at the lightly armored flagellants, who are now moving away from the front line here, as their light armored infantry models would be really susceptible to these miners with blasting charges. So instead, the great swords will be charging ahead, taking the brunt of these blasting charges, as the rest of the flagellants, the swords, and also the halberdiers flank around, trying to wrap around the rather narrow Dawi formation. Using their width advantage here, there's not really a lot of stuff to tie down all these flanking manlings. Now, in the front line, the Huntsman General has lured out a whole bunch of blasting charges. A really nice use of the single entity general right there, and minimalizing the damage on these heavily armored greatswords. You can see that even with only the leftover blasting charges, the greatsword still took some noticeable damage. But now with the Huntsman General luring out most of those explosions, the greatswords are able to get into combat, slice and dice up these glorified Dawi tin cans. Same goes for the other side here, as the greatsword mitigating those damage from the blasting charges with their heavy armor. Yes, they're taking massive damage, but they're also doing massive damage to the Dawi frontline, who cannot withstand this kind of elite infantry push. While the flanks, we have the Unbreakable Sigmarsons absorbing a whole bunch of blasting charges as well. There's a bunch of halberdiers charging into the front line, using their armor-piercing attacks to really hack down these Dwarven warriors. And due to the lack of infantry on the Dawi side, now the swordsmen, the flagellants, are now getting into the back line of the Dawi, going to shut down all these artillery and range firepower without anything to stop them. There are some Dwarf warriors pushing up ahead, trying to stop these swordsmen and halberdiers, but then there are just so many manlings pushing forward. There are now some of them getting into the flame cannons, who have been shot up by the Bright Wizard with the Fireball, who is now being pushed away, thanks to the gyrocopter chasing away the magic support. But unfortunately, that is not enough to save the Dawi backline, as more and more state troops are pouring in, overwhelming the Dawi artillery positions. The gyro bomber circling around in the sky, hoping to find an Umgi blob to bomb. These halberds and flagellants would have been a great target, but nice micro from Strat Games here, pulling away the flagellants, saving the unbreakable infantry. But still, the bombs can be devastating. Combined with a shot from the flame cannons, the damage is so devastating it basically put a full health halberdier into wavering territory, and a second shot comes in and now the unit is routed. The problem is the flame cannons and whatnot are all basically compromised. Unable to fire, a lot of these cannon crews and whatnot are being chased away by the manling infantry. The range firepower from the Dawi is basically gone. Ungrim Iron Fist is holding firm, but unfortunately the Huntsman General is slowly chipping away his health with those nasty sniping attempts. In the skies, the fireball comes in and snipes out one of the gyrocopter with brimstone guns, and the gyro bomber is still circling around trying to find good blobs to bomb, but there's not a lot of blobs forming due to the good micro from the Empire player here, constantly pushing the infantry forward, constantly keeping them on the move. They were bombing runs, but only 38 kills on the gyro bombers as the manling infantry are just so spread out, and as a result there are not a lot of obvious blobs for the gyro bomber to target. On the side note, there's a single unit of swordsmen kind of forgotten on the flank, simply because there are so many units of Empire troops. 1 or 2 units are bound to be forgotten. At an overview of the battlefield, the Dawi is in the back foot with the balance of power clearly in the favor of the manlings. And Grim is fighting through a bunch of armor-piercing infantry, these halberdiers surrounding him, poking him down with long, pointy sticks, while Greatsword's also armor-piercing anti-infantry is quickly dragging down Ungrim Iron Fist. He is a tough fighter for sure, don't get me wrong, but he wants to fight big giant monsters like generals mounted on griffins, Volkswagen, a bunch of Demigryph knights and whatnot, just not a bunch of infantry surrounding him. Huntsman General taking massive damage from all these dedicated sniping firepower, but then again, there's just nothing for the Dawi to pull back this game. The artillery crew are all gone, and the infantry are being pushed away, slowly dragged down by the immense numbers of the human empire. The tide is simply way too much for the dwarfs to deal with, and the Dawi elite as they are overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the manlings. Sure, they managed to snipe out the Huntsman General, but Ungrim himself is extremely low in terms of health, surrounded by armor-piercing infantry. He will soon be meeting his demise. And today, the victory shall belong to the endless men tide of the Empire. You might have noticed that my voice sounds a bit more raspy than usual because, well, I recorded the gameplay and this post-battle screen after I got hit by Nurgle's Sea Plague. I have recovered enough to start doing recordings again, but then you can still hear some raspy voice and occasionally I still cough. So anyways, I went on a tangent there, it's not really related. Now back to the battle itself. Big thanks to Strike Games for sending in this replay and Yumi for playing this good game. For the manlings today, the full 20 stack of state troops, you can see that they don't have a lot of good value overall. Just some decent damage spread out among all the units. Many of them are still rather healthy in terms of health and numbers, and they just basically overwhelmed the Dawi artillery positions, shut down all their missiles before they themselves took too much damage. They basically went for an approach of they can't shoot us all, and that is exactly what happened. The Dawi firepower is strong, but it simply cannot clear out all the infantry before they hit the front line and start running into the back lines. Of course, the Dawi still managed to shut down the leadership here, killing off the Huntsman General, and the Bright Wizard took some significant damage, but overall, a really nice use of the Great Sword there, charging as a frontal forces, absorbing the blasting charges, allowing the faster but also lighter flagellant state troops to circle around and shut down the Dawi missile power. As for Yumi's dwarf army, we have a bunch of miners there. Some of them did some really nice damage with the blasting charges, but overall, they couldn't earn back their own value. Same goes for the dwarf warriors here being cut down by an overwhelming force of armor-piercing infantry, including the halberdiers and the great swords, and also there are some superior infantry, including the Sigma Suns and the flagellants. They were just beaten back, as the quarrelers and the Dawi cannons, the flame cannons as well, were not enough to break apart the manlings' push, the man tide. The gyro bomber tried its best to blast away the blobs, but it was simply not enough. There's just too many infantry for them to cut through. So in the end, With the surround from all the state troops, Ungrim Iron Fist, despite a formidable melee combatant, was slowly dragged into the mud, leaving the numerous Empire army standing on the battlefield victorious. And yeah, that's basically it for today's battle. If you enjoy and want to see more multiplayer battles from Total Warhammer, remember to hit the like and subscribe. And if you have any more replays you want to showcase, feel free to drop by my Discord or send me an email with the replay file attached. I'll be sure to check them out. And yeah, that's basically it for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Tactical Lich, signing out.